Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine you've just come home after serving your country. You've trained for combat. You've carried weapons in war zones. You've trusted the men and women standing beside you in uniform. But tonight, there is no battlefield. There are no enemy combatants. There are no incoming rounds. There is only your apartment, your sanctuary, the one place every American should be able to call safe. You're talking to someone you love. Your television is on. Your dog is nearby. Then someone starts pounding on your door. Not gently, not like a neighbor, not like a friend. Loud, urgent, demanding. You pause. Your instincts begin to work because you've been trained. You look toward the door. You don't know who's outside. You don't know why they're here. You don't know if the danger is outside or about to come inside. So you do what millions of Americans legally do every single day. You pick up your firearm, not to threaten anyone, not to commit a crime, but because you believe you have the right to protect yourself inside your own home. You walk toward the door. You open it. Less than 2 seconds later, your life is over. Your mother will never hear your voice again. Your brother will struggle to carry the unimaginable grief. Your Air Force squadron will bury another warrior. And America will once again ask a question that has echoed for generations. Can a black man safely answer his own front door? This is the story of United States Air Force Senior Airman Roger Fortson. And this is Cigar A Crime. Welcome back to Cigar A Crime, where the smooth draw of a fine cigar meets the hard truths of justice. I'm your host, Dr. D, and once again, I want to welcome each of you to the Lounge of Truth. This is the room where headlines slow down, where evidence speaks louder than opinions, where victims become more than statistics, and where we refuse to let forgotten stories disappear beneath the next news cycle. If you're joining us for the first time, thank you. If you've been walking this journey with me, welcome home. Before we begin, let me make something very clear. Tonight's episode is not an attack on law enforcement. It is not an attempt to inflame division, nor is it an effort to tell you what to believe. Tonight, we're going to examine the evidence. We're going to listen carefully. We're going to separate verified facts from assumptions. We'll explore the perspectives of investigators, the Fortson family, the defense, and the legal system, because justice demands honesty, and honesty demands patience. Our responsibility isn't to confirm our biases. Our responsibility is to follow the evidence wherever it leads. As always, I encourage you to listen with an open mind, and by the end, ask yourself one simple question: what does justice require? Tonight's cigar couldn't be more appropriate. The Rocky Patel Freedom, not simply because of its name, but because of everything that word represents. Freedom, for many, is just another word. But for men and women wearing the uniform of the United States military, freedom is a mission. It is a responsibility. Sometimes it is the last thing they fight to protect. The Rocky Patel Freedom was created as a tribute to American service and patriotism. Its blend emphasizes strength balanced with refinement, a fitting metaphor for those who serve, disciplined under pressure, yet grounded in purpose. Reviewers often describe notes of cedar, leather, earth, and spice, and a steady, balanced finish that rewards patience rather than haste. That balance is what stays with me, because balance is exactly what this case appears to have lacked. One man had spent years learning discipline under extraordinary pressure. Another faced a rapidly unfolding situation at an apartment door. Within moments, those two paths collided. As I light today's cigar, I'm reminded that smoke teaches patience. You don't rush a good cigar. You don't force it. You let it develop, layer after layer after layer. Investigation should work the same way. Justice should work the same way. Because when we rush to conclusions, we often miss the truth hiding beneath the surface. Tonight, this cigar isn't about celebration. It's about reflection. It's about service. It's about constitutional rights. And it's about one question. What does freedom truly mean? If someone can survive overseas combat, but lose his life answering his own front door. Before Roger became headlined, long before the body camera footage, that was simply Roger. Roger Nigel Fortson wasn't born wearing Air Force stripes. He wasn't born carrying headlines. He wasn't born at the center of a national conversation about policing. He was someone's son, someone's brother, someone's friend, someone's reason to smile. Those closest to Roger described a young man who believed in responsibility before recognition. The kind of young man who quietly handled business, who didn't seek unnecessary attention, who understood that success wasn't measured by applause, but by showing up. Growing up in Georgia, Roger matured with dreams larger than the neighborhood around him. Friends and family remember someone who stayed focused, someone who wasn't interested in living recklessly. His mother, Shantamika, known lovingly as Mika, has spoken repeatedly about the values she worked to instill in him: discipline, respect, faith, purpose. Those values followed Roger into adulthood. When many young people were still searching for direction, Roger found his: the United States Air Force. In 2019, he enlisted and eventually became a senior airman assigned to the 4th Special Operations Squadron at Holbrook Field, serving as a special missions aviator aboard the AC-13-0J, Ghost Rider. Now let that sink in for a moment. Not everyone in the military serves in this role. Special operations is demanding. It requires discipline, precision, trust. Roger's responsibilities placed him aboard one of the military's most sophisticated aircraft, supporting missions where mistakes could carry life or death consequences. Those who served with him remembered him as dependable, professional, calm under pressure, and deeply respected. Outside this uniform, Roger was still a young man. He laughed, he loved, he dreamed. He called his family. He planned for the future. He wanted to provide. His mother has spoken about his desire to build a better life for those he loved. That dream is now carried only in memory. On May 3rd, 2024, Roger wasn't deployed. He wasn't responding to an emergency overseas. He wasn't in combat. He was home, talking with his girlfriend on FaceTime, watching television, living what should have been one of the safest moments of his life. But while Roger sat inside apartment 1401, another series of decisions had already begun unfolding outside his door. A report, a dispatch, an apartment number, a deputy responding, and a chain of events, according to investigators, would end with Roger Fortson opening his apartment door while legally holding a handgun pointed toward the floor and being shot within moments. The sheriff's own administrative review later concluded no crime was occurring inside that apartment and that the use of deadly force was not objectively reasonable. We're going to slow this case down minute by minute, second by second. We'll examine what dispatch knew, what the deputy knew, what Roger knew, and what none of them knew before those fatal shots forever changed one family. Because sometimes the truth isn't hidden in what happened. It's hidden in the time between one knock and one gunshot. May 3rd, 2024, Fort Walton Beach, Florida. It was a Friday afternoon for Senior Airman Roger Fortson. There was no documented emergency inside apartment 1401. No injured woman waiting to be rescued. No physical confrontation unfolding behind the door. No weapon being used against another person. Roger was inside his home, reportedly connected to his girlfriend through a video call. But somewhere else in the apartment complex, a resident believes she was hearing something troubling. And before we move forward, we need to be precise about what she later told investigators, because this story is more complicated than the phrase wrong apartment can sometimes make it sound. According to the Okaloosa County Sheriff's Office, the Investigative investigation, the resident lived near Roger and said sound could travel through an air conditioning vent in her bedroom. She told investigators that she heard Roger speaking loudly. She said she heard footsteps or scuffling noises. And she recalled hearing statements that sounded like, "Sick of you lying to my face," and "You're a liar." But she also acknowledged something critical. She did not hear another person answering him that afternoon. She assumed he was arguing with someone because of his tone, his words, and what she believed she heard moving through that vent. The person Roger may have been speaking to was not standing inside the apartment. Roger was reportedly communicating remotely. That distinction, the difference between hearing one side of a heated conversation and witnessing a physical confrontation, would become the first major fault line in this case. A voice rises through a vent. A neighbor becomes concerned. That concern is shared with apartment personnel. Apartment personnel contact law enforcement. And by the time the information reaches the responding deputy, it is hardened into something more urgent. A man and woman, a physical disturbance, an apartment number, a possible emergency. The sheriff administrative report described the information reaching law enforcement as coming through multiple people rather than directly from a first-hand witness. That does not mean the resident was wrong to be concerned. It does mean the information required careful verification, because concern is not the same as certainty. An assumption is not the same as observation. And when information travels from one person to another, every retelling can sand away the doubt until what remains sounds like a fact. At approximately 4:28 p.m., Okaloosa County Sheriff's Deputy Eddie Duran arrived at the apartment complex. The incident was taking place, or was believed to be taking place, at the Ellen Apartments, located on Racetrack Road in Fort Walton Beach. Duran first went to the leasing area, At 4:28 and 22 seconds, the body camera timeline shows him attempting to determine what was happening. The employee he needed was not immediately inside. So the two men present at the office did not appear to know about a fight. One said he had not witnessed one. Another one was unaware whether a confrontation had occurred at all. That should be noted. The first people Duran encountered could not independently confirm that a physical altercation was underway. At 4:28 and 57 seconds, Duran contacted an apartment employee in the parking lot. He asked, "Are they fighting or something?" The employee responded that this was what a neighbor had reported. She said the alleged incidents happened frequently, but this time the caller believed it was becoming more serious. Duran asked which door. Instead of immediately providing the unit number, the employee first described an early event, something she believed she had heard approximately 2 weeks before. She recalled yelling. She recalled an apparent slapping sound. But she also admitted that she had not been certain where those early noises originated. That prior uncertainty matters because it appears to have been blended into the urgency of the current report. At 4:29 and 33 seconds, Duran asked again, "Which room is it?" The time, the response was direct, 14:01. Duran repeated it, 14:01, okay? The employee confirmed it again, 14:01. She added that the report residents sounded frightened and believed the situation was getting out of hand. At 4:29 and 48 seconds, Duran instructed the employee to remain near the leasing area and direct the second deputy who was reportedly coming. Then Duran entered the elevator alone. Let us stop here, because by this point, Duran had been given a specific apartment number. That fact is important when examining one of the earliest public disputes in this case. The Fortson family and its attorneys said the deputy had gone to the wrong apartment. The sheriff initially pushed back, saying Duran went to the unit he had been directed to. Both statements address different meanings of the word wrong. Duran did not accidentally misread the building number and knock on 14:01 after being told 14:03. He was directed to 14:01. But the suspected physical disturbance, the reason armed law enforcement was sent upstairs, was not occurring inside Roger Fortson's home. So geographically, the deputy reached the number he was given. Substantively, he arrived at the home of a man who was not assaulting anyone. That is why language matters. The deputy went to the number provided. Does not answer the deeper question. Why was that number provided as the location of a physical domestic disturbance without direct confirmation that two people were even inside? At 4:29 and 57 seconds, Duran pressed the button for the 4th floor. There is something haunting about an elevator ride in a case like this, because in hindsight, we know what waits at the top. But in the moment, neither man knew the other. Roger did not know a deputy was traveling towards his home. Duran didn't know that Roger was a 23-year-old active duty airman. He did not know that Roger was alone. He did not know there was no woman inside requiring rescue. He did not know the object of the loud conversation may have been speaking to Roger through a phone. Each man possessed only part of the truth, but only one of them was moving toward the other with the authority of the state. At 4:30 and 22 seconds, Duran exited the elevator. A large number 4 identified the floor. At 4:30 and 29 seconds, he followed a directional sign towards apartment 1401 and 1402. At 4:30 and 39 seconds, he entered an open-air breezeway. To one side stood the exterior wall of the building. To the other, a metal railing overlooking the parking area several floors below. At 4:30 and 45 seconds, he passed apartment 1402. At 4:30 and 56 seconds, he stopped in front of apartment 1401. The number was clearly displayed beside the door. At 4:30 and 58 seconds, Duran leaned towards Roger's door and listened. This is one of the most important moments before the shooting. What did he hear? According to the administrative record, there was no clearly audible fight. No woman screaming for help. No sounds of blows landing. No furniture crashing. No argument that could be heard from the hallway. No direct evidence at that door that a violent struggle was taking place. The call that described an escalating physical disturbance. But the hallways was quiet. And silence can mean many things. It can mean the fight had stopped. It could mean someone is injured. It could mean the parties have separated. Or it can mean the original interpretation was wrong. The question investigators would later confront was whether that silence should have changed Duran's tactics. Should he have paused? Should he have waited for backup? Should he have asked dispatch to reconnect with the reporting resident? Should he have attempted to determine whether the caller had actually seen two people? Should he have approached the encounter as a welfare check rather than an active physical confrontation? Those are questions, not verdicts, but they are questions born from the evidence. At 4:31 and 16 seconds, Duran knocked for the first time. He did not identify himself during the first knock. 1 second later, he stepped away from the door toward the left side. A dog barked from inside the apartment. Then Duran crossed in front of the doorway and positioned himself on the other side. This movement would later become significant because the Fortson family argued that Roger may have attempted to determine who was outside, while the deputy's position beside the doorway could have limited what Roger saw through that peephole. The publicly available record does not conclusively establish exactly what Roger could see, but the video does establish that Duran moved from one side of the doorway to the other, rather than standing centered in front of it. At 4:31 and 31 seconds, a muffled voice could be heard inside. Investigators believe the voice possibly said, "Who is it?" 10 seconds later, another unclear statement was audible. The administrative report said it possibly sounded like, "How the police." The exact phrase is uncertain. That uncertainty must remain in the script. We should not pretend muffled audio is clearer than it is. What is clear? That there was communication from inside the apartment and that the first knock had not included an announcement identifying the visitor as law enforcement. At 4:31 and 46 seconds, Duran knocked a second time. This time, he loudly announced, "Sheriff's office." Opened the door. At 4:31 and 51 seconds, he crossed the doorway once more and repositioning himself on the opposite side. At 4:31 and 55 seconds, he knocked a third time and again announced, "Sheriff's office, open the door." 5 seconds later, the door began to open. While Duran stood outside, Roger Fortson was inside his home. According to accounts provided by the family and its attorneys, Roger had been speaking with his girlfriend through FaceTime. The family's account indicated that Roger was concerned because someone was knocking aggressively and he was not initially sure who was there. He retrieved his legally owned handgun. Now, there is a legal and cultural tension at the center of this moment. Many Americans are told that the home is their castle. They are told that they have a constitutional right to possess a firearm. They are told that if an unknown person is pounding on your door, they may prepare to defend themselves. Police officers, on the other hand, are trained to treat visible firearms as potential threats. So, what happens when both ideas arrive at the same doorway? What happens when a citizen believes he's exercising his right to protect his home, and an officer interprets that presence of that protection as an immediate danger? The answer unfolded in less time than it takes to finish this sentence. At 4:32 p.m., plus 66 thousandths of a second, Roger's apartment door began to open. The administrative investigators then slowed down the body camera footage frame by frame. The camera recorded at 30 frames per second. Each frame represented approximately 33 thousandths of a second. This matters because ordinary playback compresses the encounter into a blur. A door opens. A gun appears. Shots erupt. But when investigators separated the footage frame by frame, the sequence became measurable, and measurement leaves less room for mythology. At 1.6 seconds after the door began opening, Duran said, "Step back." At 3.168 thousandths of a second, Duran's firearm entered the camera frame. At 3.300 thousandths of a second, Roger's right hand and handgun became visible. The sheriff's report described Roger's firearm as being down at his side and pointed straight toward the floor. At that same moment, Roger's empty left hand began to rise. His palm faced outward. Then, at 3.432 thousandths of a second, Duran fired the apparent first shot. Think about that number. Roger's gun became visible at 3.300 thousandths of a second. The first shot occurred at 3.432 thousandths of a second. The difference was approximately 0.132 thousandths of a second. That's 132 thousandths of a second. That is the documented interval between the handgun first becoming visible on camera and Duran's first discharge. This is also where we must correct a common simplification. The first shot did not occur less than 2 seconds after the door itself started opening. It occurred approximately 3.4 seconds after the door began to open, but it occurred only about 0.132 thousandths of a second after Roger's firearm entered the frame. Both measurements are true. Only one of them captures the speed of the threat decision. At 3.564 thousandths of a second, Roger began falling backward and toward his right side. His left hand moved towards his upper chest or shoulder area. At 3.6 196 thousandths of a second. Duran fired the apparent second shot. Roger continued falling. His left hand clutched his upper right chest. His firearm remained in his right hand as his body descended. At 3.960 thousandths of a second, the third apparent shot was fired. At 4.191 thousandths of a second, the fourth apparent shot was fired. At 4.290 thousandths of a second, Roger's right hand struck the floor. At 323 thousandths of a second, his hip struck the floor, and his right hand began to open. At approximately 4.4 seconds, investigators heard what they identified as a fifth shot. 4 shots could be tracked visually through small traces of muzzle smoke. The fifth was estimated through audio. By then, Roger was falling or already on the floor. The official administrative report states that 5 shots were heard on the body camera recording. Other public accounts, including statements from the family's legal team, have described Roger as having been shot 6 times. Those are not necessarily the same measurement. The number of shots fired is not always identical to the number of wounds documented, because one projectile can create more than one wound, if that makes sense. But without the complete autopsy and ballistics record and the public evidence reviewed for this episode, we should not force a conclusion. What we can say is this: the sheriff frame-by-frame review identified 5 audible discharges. Roger was struck multiple times in the chest area, and the entire volley unfolded in roughly 1 second. At 5.7 seconds, Roger's right hand was visible between his legs. The firearm was no longer in it. Then at approximately 6.4 seconds, Duran issued the command, "Drop the gun, drop the gun." The order came after the shots had already been fired. At 8.4 seconds, Roger said, "It's over there." At 9.1 seconds, Duran again ordered him to drop the gun. At 10 seconds, Roger answered, "I don't have it." That sequence is central to this case. There was no documented command to drop the firearm before the first shot. Duran told Roger to step back. Then the gun became visible. Then the shooting began. Only afterward came the direct command to put the weapon down. At 4:32 and 12 seconds, Duran transmitted over the radio, "Shot fired, suspect down." The language of policing often moves faster than the identity. In that moment, Roger was labeled the suspect. But what crime had he committed? There was no domestic assault victim inside. No illegal entry. No attack on the deputy documented by the camera. No indication that Roger fired his weapon. No evidence that he pointed it at Duran at all. The sheriff would later say Roger had committed no crime. Yet in the first radio transmission after the shooting, the 23-year-old airman bleeding inside his own doorway became the suspect down. At 4:32 and 16 seconds, Duran ordered Roger not to move. At 4:32 and 20 seconds, he called for emergency medical services. At 4:32 and 24 seconds, additional deputies began arriving. At 4:32 and 32 seconds, Roger said, "I can't breathe." 4 words, a sentence that has become painfully familiar in American encounters with law enforcement involving force. But here, it was also a literal medical emergency. Roger had suffered multiple gunshot wounds to his chest. At 4:32 and 37 seconds, Duran told him, "Do not move. Stop moving. Stop moving. At 4:32 and 44 seconds, Roger rolled from his one side unto his back. Blood was visible on the floor. Duran radioed for EMS to hurry, reporting that Roger was bleeding heavily and had multiple wounds to the chest. At 4:32 and 50 seconds, Duran told him, "Hang on, man. We got EMS coming for you. Don't move." 8 seconds later, as the deputies reached the doorway, Duran said he had a gun as soon as he opened that door. At 4:33 and 5 seconds, Duran and 3 other deputies entered apartment 1401. They announced themselves repeatedly as they moved through the residence. They were looking for anyone else who might be inside. A possible victim, a possible additional suspect, someone injured, someone hiding, someone posing another threat. But the apartment was empty. There was no woman inside, no second party, no evidence of a physical domestic confrontation that had brought police to Roger's door. The assumption that 2 people were engaged in violence dissolved room by room. At 4:33 and 35 seconds, one deputy transitioned from clearing the apartment to rendering aid. At 4:33 and 44 seconds, the apartment had been cleared, and another deputy began assisting Roger. At 4:33 and 51 seconds, a third deputy moved to provide aid. That places the beginning of hands-on assistance approximately a minute and a half after the shots. Whether that interval really affected Roger's chances of survival, we cannot determine that without the medical expert analysis and autopsy records. Law enforcement will argue that officers had to ensure that the apartment contained no additional threat before focusing fully on treatment. And critics may ask whether the invisible circumstances permitted aid to begin sooner. Both issues deserve examination. Neither should be answered through emotion alone. At 4:33 and 49 seconds, Duran said he was going to step outside. At 4:34 and 5 seconds, the body camera record captured him using profanity. At 4:34 and 18 seconds, while walking along the breezeway, he struck a wall with his fist and cursed again. A supervising corporal approached him and asked whether he was all right. Duran responded, "Yeah, as soon as he opened the door, there's a gun." That became the immediate explanation. Not that Roger pointed it, not that Roger fired it, not that Roger verbally threatened him, but that when the door opened, a gun was present. And that distinction would eventually become the dividing line between the deputy's fear and the sheriff's conclusion. Duran later told investigators that Roger appeared to move toward him. He described seeing aggression and anger in Roger's eyes. He characterized the moment as essentially him or me. But he also acknowledged that Roger's firearm was pointed down. The sheriff's administrative investigators, they ultimately concluded that Roger made no hostile or attacking movement, and that the objective evidence did not justify the use of deadly force. When we stripe away the headlines, the opinions, and the courtroom arguments, the official timeline leaves us with several documented facts. A concerned resident believed she heard Roger arguing and reported her concerns through apartment personnel. Deputy Eddie Duran was directed to apartment 1401. When he reached the door, he heard no active physical disturbance. His first knock was unannounced. He later identified himself as the sheriff's office twice. Roger Fortson opened the door holding a legally possessed handgun, pointed toward the floor while raising his left hand. That was empty. Approximately 0.132 thousandths of a second after Roger's firearm became visible, Deputy Duran fired. Roger never fired his weapon. The sheriff's administrative investigation concluded Roger didn't point his firearm at Deputy Duran and made no hostile or attacking movements. The command to drop the gun came after shots had already been fired. Roger told deputies, "I don't have it." And moments later, he said, "I can't breathe." When deputies cleared apartment 1401, they found Roger alone. No second person, no victim, no domestic assault. Just a 23-year-old United States Air Force senior airman whose life ended in an encounter lasting only seconds. There was no pursuit, no exchange of gunfire, no hostage situation, only a report, an assumption, a knock, a door, and 0.132 thousandths of a second that would forever change a family's life. But a timeline tells us only what happened. It doesn't tell us whether those actions were legally justified. In part 3, we'll examine the investigation itself. We'll analyze the body camera evidence, the sheriff's administrative findings, the physical and forensic evidence, the manslaughter charge against Deputy Eddie Duran, the anticipated self-defense argument, Florida's self-defense laws and castle doctrine, and the Fortson's family's federal civil lawsuit. Because here in the Lounge of Truth, it's not enough to know what happened. We have to ask whether justice was served. Now that we walk through the timeline, let's examine what happened after the shooting. Within hours, multiple investigations began. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement assumed the criminal investigation, while the Okaloosa County Sheriff's Office launched its own administrative review. One of the most significant pieces of this case wasn't uncovered by an outside agency. It came from the sheriff's office itself. After reviewing the body camera footage, frame by frame, interviewing witnesses, and examining the available evidence, investigators reached a conclusion that surprised many people. Roger Fortson never pointed his firearm at Deputy Eddie Duran. The administrative review found no hostile or attacking movements by Roger before the shots were fired. And perhaps most importantly, the sheriff's office concluded that Deputy Duran's use of deadly force was not objectively reasonable under its policies. Sheriff Eric Ayton later announced that Duran had violated agency policy and terminated his employment. But the investigation didn't end there. Months later, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement completed its criminal investigation. Former Deputy Eddie Duran was arrested and charged with manslaughter with the firearm. He pleaded not guilty. His defense had indicated that it intends to argue that he acted in self-defense. The criminal trial remains pending. At the time, Roger Fortson's family filed a federal civil lawsuit alleging excessive force, wrongful deaths, failures in training and supervision, and negligence connected to the events that unfolded that afternoon. Those civil allegations have not yet been decided by a court. Now let's talk about the law. Florida recognizes what's commonly known as the castle doctrine. The basic principle is simple. A person's home is their sanctuary. Within that home, individuals generally have the legal right to possess a firearm, and under certain circumstances defend themselves against an unlawful threat. Law enforcement officers, however, operate under a different legal standard. Officers may use deadly force only when they reasonably believe an imminent threat or death or serious bodily harm exists. That brings us to the central legal question in this case. When Roger Fortson opened his apartment door while lawfully holding a firearm, Deputy Duran saw that firearm. Whose understanding of the law governed those next few seconds? The residents? The deputies? Or both? Because when two people each believe the law protects them, what happens when they meet at the same doorway? That question now rests with the courts. Because this case also reignited a larger national conversation. Researchers have spent years examining racial disparities in police encounters. Studies have shown that Black Americans experience police use of force at a disproportionately higher rate than white Americans. Those are just facts. Those statistics cannot tell us why any single encounter occurred. They cannot determine intent. And they cannot answer the legal questions before a jury. But they do provide context for why cases like Roger Fortson resonate so deeply across this country. For many communities, this isn't viewed as an isolated event. It's viewed as part of a much longer conversation about perception, trust, accountability, and an equal protection under the law. Then, before Roger's family could even begin healing, another tragedy struck. Less than 3 months after Roger's death, his 16-year-old brother, Andre Fortson, was fatally shot in Georgia during a separate incident. The two shootings are not legally connected. Investigators have not alleged that Roger's death caused Andre's. But for their mother, for their family, the pain became inseparable. One son buried, then another. No parent should ever have to endure that. And yet, the Fortson family did. Sometimes the greatest tragedies isn't found in one moment. Sometimes it's found in everything that follows. Tonight, I keep coming back to one image. A front door. Think about how many times you've opened yours today. Maybe to leave for work, maybe to welcome family, maybe to bring in groceries, maybe to let the dog outside. A front door represents ordinary life, routine, comfort, home. We rarely think of it as the place where life ends. But for Roger Fortson, it became exactly that. Roger survived military training. He accepted the responsibility of serving his country. He prepared for dangers that most Americans will never experience. Yet the place that should have required the least courage, opening the door to his own apartment, became the last thing he ever did. As we've said throughout this episode, the criminal case is still pending. Deputy Eddie Duran is presumed innocent unless proven guilty in court. His trial is scheduled to begin on September 28th, 2026. The legal system now has the responsibility of determining whether his actions were criminal under Florida law. But beyond the courtroom, there are questions that belong to all of us. How do we reduce misunderstandings before they become tragedies? How do we improve training without compromising officer safety? How do we preserve constitutional rights while protecting human life? And how do we rebuild trust once it has been broken. Justice is not measured only by convictions. Justice is also measured by whether we learn, whether policies improve, whether communication improves, whether accountability exists when mistakes are made, whether another family is spared the kind of grief. Before Roger's family could finish mourning one son, they buried another. No verdict, no lawsuit, no settlement can restore what has taken from them. This is the part of this story we should never forget. Not the headlines, not the arguments, not the politics, the people. Roger Fortson, Andre Fortson, a mother whose life changed forever. A family still waiting for answers. As this cigar burns lower, I'm reminded that every cigar eventually turns to ash. But before it does, it tells a story. Tonight, Roger Fortson's story became part of ours. Not because we knew him personally, but because justice belongs to every one of us. If all we remember is the body camera footage, we've missed the man. Remember Roger. Remember Andre. Remember the family still carrying unimaginable loss. If today's episode challenged you, share it, have the conversation, listen before judging, and continue asking the questions that justice demands. Thank you for spending time with me here in the Lounge of Truth. Until next time, keep seeking the facts, keep honoring the victims, and never forget, the smoke never lies. I'm Dr. D. Good night.